Well, welcome to another episode of Fair Folk at Work. You know, when you go and you see a parade at fair and there's all those people, and you can kind of figure out who the queen is. She's the one on the chair with all the soldiers and stuff. And then there's a guy in like robes, and you go to someone and you say, "Who's that?" And they say, "That's the Lord Mayor." And then you say, "I didn't vote for him." So my guest today will explain how you become the Lord Mayor at the Renaissance Fair. My guest today is James Bohlin. Welcome, James.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here. I got one vote to be the Lord Mayor, but luckily it was Phyllis Patterson. So I won in a landslide. What happened was I was always at the fair kind of as an outside contractor. I was in theater companies and we did shows on stage. And one year we were doing another show up in Petaluma and I got a call that Phyllis wanted to talk to me. So I called back and you remember Scott Beach?
No, I was more a Southern Fair person.
Scott Beach was Lord Mayor forever since the start of the first fair. And every year, he was very good at it too. It was really ideal. Every year, he always said, "That's the last year. I'm never doing it again." And then every year, he did it again. So this was one year when suddenly he didn't do it again. So they were looking around for somebody. I had once been a hawker, and I do a lot of stage work, so they knew me. And so Phil said, "Well, get Jim Bohlin." So they did. And that's how I became Lord Mayor. It was my first time ever actually being a part of what they call the court, the people who regularly worked. And it was an interesting distance because my work at the fair had always been presentational. I'm on stage talking out to people. And now suddenly it's some of that, because obviously you do shows, you do the noon show and you do the Queen show and you do the parade. But there's also a lot of times when you're just sort of interacting with the court. So that was fun. It was a kind of an interesting improv. Hopefully you did it loud enough so that the crowd could hear it, but it wasn't really directed at the crowd. So I enjoyed it. It was fun.
Who was your wife?
My wife was Scott Beach's wife, Judy Corey. As long as I can remember, she was the wife of the Lord Mayor. And she was so fun to work with. We came up with a subplot where I was trying to buy an earldom. And so it was constantly all about that, about sucking up to the right courtiers and stuff like that. We had a great time. It was fun. She's a great improver.
I did an interview with Judy Corey, one of the first persons I talked with, and she was just a marvel as both a person on stage and a person to improv and a person who could draw in anybody and make them feel comfortable and set them up so that they couldn't fail.
When I first got into Facebook, within a day of joining Facebook, I received a friend request from Judy Corey, and it was great to hear from her, but immediately I thought, oh my God, I joined Facebook and the first person I hear from is my ex-wife.
Well, let me ask my first traditional question.
Okay.
Who was the person who first said to you, there's this thing called fair, and what did they say to get you to go out there?
A friend of mine, Jessica Overstreet, became a vendor, and she had a booth there, and I went there as a hawker, and they built a platform for me, so I was up high, and I'm barking to the crowd, fine clothing, and all sort of stuff like that, and that was really fun. That's when I met Phyllis. She saw me and liked what I was doing, and then I did that for several years. And finally, a man named Patrick Porter, who loomed pretty large in the fair, asked me to be in one of his comedias. So I did one of his comedias, and it was fun. Then we did another and a medicine show. And then he asked me to be in a show he was doing for the Dickens Fair, which I hadn't heard of either. So I went up there and I had to sing in that. I had to do a few lines of Gilbert and Sullivan. And I wasn't using my voice right, and I started to get hoarse. And I couldn't go on. So this other group there of people I had met called the Thieves Theater offered to go on for me. And they're very funny guys. They did a 4-person, 30-minute version of Christmas Carol. with everybody switching parts and just like putting on different costumes and things. And so they went on for me. And then Patrick decided to stop doing the fair. So I started doing my own comedians and my own medicine shows with some other friends. And that was really fun. I did that for maybe a couple of years, North and South. And then the guys from the Thieves Theater called me and said one of the members was quitting and would I like to join? So I flew up to San Francisco and met with them and sounded like fun. That became the center of my life. I mean, the fair before was something I did seasonally, but suddenly when I was in the Thieves Theater, that became, I moved into a big house with one of the members and they became my best friends and they're still my best friends. I still see. That
Can you
really
give me
changed
some
my life.
names?
Sheldon Penner,
Okay.
Gary Krakauer, Bruce Perry. And while I was there doing the Thieves Theater, I became a great friend with Marilyn Prince, who was also on another committee. She's the best Columbina I've ever seen in my life. Then she met a guy named Jim Letchworth, who was doing Commedia and also playing, I think he was playing the Puritan back then. And then they got married, so they became incredibly close friends. And their kids are close friends to me. And I have some other friends, Paul and Barbara Tracy, who are in a Commedia with the Letchworths, and they became my good friends. So all my lifelong friends, almost without exception, are from the fair.
Can I back the chronological truck up a bit and
Sure.
talk about you hawking fine clothing on the top of a pillar?
Yeah, it was a platform they built at the front of the stage. And I think there was a lot more of that than, hawking their wares. And so I had a whole spiel of, silks from the Orient and cotton from Egypt and shouting fine clothing over and over again. And the crowd would come up and I'd interact with them a bit. So it was really fun.
So it quickly became clear to you that the fair was an immersive environment. Is that correct?
Yeah, which I enjoyed.
What about the ever-changing audience flowing in front of you appealed to you as a performer?
Well, I liked breaking the fourth wall. I liked to play UCLA where we did that. We played with Caucasian chalk circles, so we built the little village. The interesting thing is the audience really, really wants you to be good. That's one thing I learned. They're not there to judge you. They're there to have fun. I mean, you can take advantage of that and pander to it, but if you got respect for yourself as an actor, then you work as hard as you can to pull them into the show. I don't remember any specific crosstalk that I did because mostly what I was doing was hawking, and that was quite loud. She shared a booth with a jeweler too, so I hawked the jewelry, but mostly it was the clothing. And then she married Steve Overstreet, and then I actually went to high school with them, but we weren't good buddies then. We just knew each other. And then once we got to the fair, we became the best of friends.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to James Monroe High School in Sepulveda.
I went to El Camino Real in Woodland Hills.
Another Valley boy.
So when you were in high school, how did you see your life unfolding if you had never gone to the fair?
I was going to be an actor, try to get into films and try to get into TV. And my mom always wanted me to have some fallback on. So I also studied English. I thought I could be an English teacher. So that was my trajectory before the fair. I also went to UCLA as a theater major. And the same thing there. I thought I would go into the industry, but the fair was so much fun. I mean, the Thieves Theater asked me to join. It meant moving to Northern California. It's not a great move for an actor to move from Hollywood to Oakland, but worked out for me in my life.
What type of roles were you looking for at that stage in your life before the fair?
In fact, I remember I want to talk to one casting director, Lynn Stonemaster, I think, who said, there's going to be a lot of work for you when you grow into the parts you can play, when you reach the age of the parts you can play, because they don't hire college kids to play 50-year-old men there. So I was encouraging. Of course, they forgot to tell me that when I was that old, so would all the other famous people be. I mean, I had a wonderful, wonderful time, but I was so broke. And I said, I don't want to be this broke when I'm 30. Sheldon Penner, my coworker in the Thieves Theater, was a type at Kaiser. And he said, you should go to Kaiser, get a job there. So I went to Kaiser. I finally got a job as driving the delivery truck, the driver carries no cash guy, and then driving around Oakland and Berkeley. And then one of the places I stopped was the data center in Berkeley. And that looked interesting. So I applied for a job as a clerk there, got the job, and then went and watched the computer operators and became a computer operator. And then I became what's called a shift analyst, which is a technical position, kind of like a programmer. And then I became a systems analyst, and then I became a systems programmer, and 25 years went by. So the fair time took a back seat then, but I still did it occasionally.
This is going to be a long question, so feel free to interrupt at any point. But my dad taught in the film department at UCLA. And so earlier in my life, I watched a lot of UCLA theater productions. And my critique, I would say, of UCLA theater department was that technically it was really, really good. But what you were told as an actor seemed to be very much an internal process of you thinking about your character, what your character was doing at that particular moment, and then expressing that somehow. The fair, I think, is completely different in that you're reacting to other people. Fair, where all you're doing is interacting with people who are walking by, as well as your fellow actors. Would you find that assessment correct or incorrect?
Well, it's funny that I agree with you with your criticism of UCLA. It was all way too method and way too internalized. I mean, you had some people who couldn't get their voice across the apron, but they were really into their character. So I was never really bought into that. There was one, what was his name? I can't remember. One teacher who was from Pittsburgh, heavily into method. It was very much, all about you and not about your connection with the audience. And the fair, of course, is the opposite. One thing, though, that did have, a great connection, and something that the fair and that kind of acting does, is that you build yourself a backstory. You build yourself who you are. You try to act within that character. So it's really good for building a character, which really served well when I got to the fair, because, like I said, Judy and I had this whole backstory about me trying to be an Earl. I would make up a backstory about, I like this person, I don't like that person. This is a friend of mine, these people I need to suck up to. So I had all that basis. So when I reacted with the crowd or with fellow actors, I could always react in character. I always knew what he would say. Acting is part emotional and part intellectual. I mean, I've got to come up with, especially at the fair, I got to come up with jokes because I'm trying to make people laugh and make people enjoy, but I also have to sort of stay true to the character. And the fair really helped you do that because, first of all, because you've got 1,000 chances a day to try it out on different people.
Precisely, yes. I remember sometimes just driving out to fair and thinking, what about doing something like this? And then just trying it out 4 hours later and then just moving on with it. And that was like really, really fun to me.
Yeah.
And I almost didn't realize at the time how unusual that was to have an audience presented to you.
And the fair did a good job of that. I think Phyllis was some kind of genius, the way she put it together. Like coming up with the fair dialect. Now, the fair dialect is kind of a pastiche. We really don't know how people talk. We can make assertions based on spelling and things like that. But to come up with a specific dialect for the Shire, once again, put you in a comfortable position. You could say no, it's a perfectly acceptable English word from the 15 and 1600s, but saying nay was more evocative. Yes, but saying I was more evocative. And it wasn't that hard for the audience to understand. They didn't often use those words, except Pence. Pence got used a lot. They felt like, I'm here in this weird, exotic situation and I'm getting it. I'm understanding it. So, the audience could feel good about themselves. So that was one of the things that I think pulled them in.
But just really basic stuff that Phyllis came up with, like the Queen is coming, it's market day, just the basic framing of why we were all there.
Yeah.
And you can go to fairs today and it's still the Queen is always going to be coming. It's always a market day.
Right.
And someone had to sort of come up with all that.
Right. And the idea that on market day is when itinerant salespeople would show up who didn't live there. Sudden appearance of foreigners in your little village, whether they're Italian or whatever, and worked within that context. So that could get very, very mundane in terms of English country life, but could also get very exotic because you had all these acrobats from Italy and Commedia dell'arte from Italy and everything from Italy, but also, from other places too. So I think that was a brilliant step to make it market day. And also that Queen Elizabeth, historically, she did travel around her kingdom and visit little shires. And so that really worked too. This is the one day in history that a queen would actually visit our little shire. So that made it a big deal.
And it gave everybody a focus on what they were there to do. You were there to suck up to the Queen and get an earldom. And Mark and I would show up and try to sell beachfront property in Loch Ness. I am continually amazed when I look back that Phyllis set up a process that got 1,000 people to give up basically 10 weekends. By and large, everybody was there on the same page. It wasn't like at Disneyland where everything was overly scripted and laid out. It was just, these are the parameters. Go out and fill in the blanks as best you can. I'm in awe of that.
Yeah, me too. It was a pretty amazing thing. I mean, now it's so commonplace. There's quote Renaissance fairs all over America, but it all started in Phyllis's backyard, and she came up with the concept.
And Judy was a big part of that too. I mean,
she was there from the beginning. She was there, I'm pretty sure, from the beginning. So was Peg Long. She was the queen for a very long time. I worked with her. She was a very, very lusty queen, swigging wine and shouting out to the people. And then Louisa Puig came along, and she was very different, but she was also very, very much in character for Queen Elizabeth, I thought. She was more sedate, but she would do the big stuff because she knew she had to. So Louisa was fun to work with too.
She could project like almost nobody else.
Yeah.
When she stood up and did the sweeping of the arm thing and everybody had to bow.
Louisa.
Huh?
Talk about Peg or Louisa?
I remember Louisa doing it. I came there, I think, as Louisa was one of her first years.
She and I went to LABC together years earlier, so I already knew her.
Oh, yeah?
Fun to see her again, yeah.
Do you remember anybody ever sort of cluing you into the gestalt of the fair and they said, whatever you do, fill in the blank? Or other than attending workshops, was there a particular time that a light bulb went on and you went, oh, this is what the fair is all about and I like it?
Good question. I'm trying to think of something. Well, one thing, my friend Steve Overstreet, he and his wife made clothing, and she passed on quite early, quite young, and he continued to do the fair for another, I think, 15 years. And he did North and South, and I did North and South too. We, used to ride up that bus. He said that, the Shire is the town he lives in. It is his hometown. His apartment in Cagle Canyon, or his apartment wherever he was at the time in San Fernando, was not where he lived. That's not where his friends were. That's not where his relationships were. He lived in that little village. And the fact that it only existed for 6 weeks in the north and 6 weeks in the south and 6 weeks in Christmas was irrelevant to the fact that it was the town he lived in. And that's very much how it felt to me too. I mean, not to the extent it did to him because his life was completely in the fair, but it really did feel like home. And that's the kind of thing that when he pointed out, I thought, yeah, this is where I live. This is kind of cool.
You remember going on auditions for non-fair roles that you took fair acting street techniques and tried to apply them to a non-fair theatrical environment?
Not very often because I didn't find it to be successful. The fair is big and what you do is big and what you do is kind of glib. And for the parts I was trying out for, I wasn't trying out for, the lead. I was trying out for one of the smaller characters, and they had to be smaller for film and for TV. They had to be smaller. So I didn't really, except for being able to ad lib quickly, which I was always pretty good at anyway. I didn't really find that the fair acting worked in the industry. That was my assessment anyway.
Well, let me try the same question, but instead of acting in a non-fair environment, substitute on your job as a data processor.
That's kind of interesting because when I got to be an analyst and started working with the systems programmers, almost the head of the system program department was Dave Thulis. And almost all of the system program were in the Society of Creative Activism, and they were fair people, So, it was like an instant in with those folks, Tracy and Dave and people like that, I mean, so that was an interesting coincidence.
So they would have their fair goblets on the desk or something like that?
Yeah, they'd have their fair goblets in the desk. They had long hair. They had Tracy Blackstone was very, very much into the fair. And they would, I'd see them jousting in the BART station. To me, it kind of made sense that the people who did the fair and who were so meticulous about doing the fair, and the security, if anyone was meticulous, it was the SCA. It made sense to me that they would be systems programmers because it's that kind of a job. And it's also, not only is it like a lot of an analytical skill, but you have to do it quickly sometimes. And it's very much a tight-knit group, people who work and play together. Yeah. And even for people outside the SCA, I think that, there again, the fact that people didn't want you to fail, people wanted you to be successful, really helped me to see people more as collaborators than as competition, which is more common in the business world, So I think it made me more collaborative in general, and which can really break through all the nonsense of the corporate world.
And you're also, like the fair, given sort of a broad parameter of what success looks like.
Yeah.
And then you're not overly managed to create the answer.
Right. In fact, for a long time, I worked the night shift, and my job was really to find the problem rather than to create the answer. I'd find the problem and then, paste something together to make it work through the night, and then hand it over to the systems programmers or the application programmers in the morning.
Was this at Kaiser as well?
Yeah. Kaiser in Berkeley at first, and then they closed the Berkeley situation. I moved down to Corona. That's when I moved back to Southern California, and thought I'd give showbiz another whirl. But I got into the union, but I didn't get much work. Kaiser afforded me the opportunity to I went to London maybe 7 times, nothing but watch theater. I'm a little bit of sightseeing, a little bit of history, but mostly I went. There was 6 evening performances a week, and usually 3 matinees, and I was usually at one every week, every time. I think I saw like 23 shows in 2 weeks. So Yeah. In fact, that's something that America doesn't really have that the fair sort of did is that I was at the Olivier Theater to see King Lear. And they have restaurants and stuff out in the lobby, and there were families, average middle class and working class families with their kids there to watch Shakespeare. But there's a very much attitude of going to the theater, and then there's a appreciation of live theater, which I think a lot of Americans got that from things like the Renaissance Fair, because when they finally get it, there's something different about seeing it live, about being right in front of the people doing it. But people
When
never.
you were doing comedias, what was your role?
I was usually either Dottore or Capitano.
What attracted you to those characters, and to you, what was the key in playing those roles?
Dottore was just that he was such a pedant. He loved to be the guy with the answer. He loved to tell everybody about it. And so that's what I'm got to admit, I'm a little like that. Yeah, Jim and I would joke, he's a little bit Pantalone, and I'm a little bit Dottore, just my natural state. Plus, the people who asked me to June thought I was a Dottore, so I thought, well, he must be right. Capitano was more interesting because he's a braggadocio, but he's also kind of inept. My key for him was sort of the cowardly lion. He's all puffed up. I'm so great. I'm so wonderful. And he's really not. Of course, he thinks he's great with women, and he isn't. Of course, they all do that. So yeah, I like him. I like the swagger of him, the braggadocio. Like I said, he's always puffing himself up.
And you mentioned Maryland as Columbina.
Yeah, she was a wonderful Columbina. I mean, Columbina is the best friend of Isabella. She's the best friend of the ingenue. And there are some great ones. Like Joan Blondell was always a great Columbina. But I thought Marilyn just really had it, because she had so much animation, and she was very gung-ho, very ready to really join in, and very serious about her work. So and she's just such a joy to know. I've been friends with her now her kids are in their 30s, and I knew them before she was married. And they're friends now too, which is there again, back to the fair. All of my nieces and nephews, none of whom I'm related to, are for the most part fair kids.
One of the things I liked about my interview with Marilyn was she went through how she taught commedia to children, and she stressed the importance of the animal behind the character.
Yes. And it's so great. It's so great for kids because it really pulls them in, and they're capable. I mean, everybody has, whether it's imaginative or cliche, everybody has their idea of what a cat is like, and what a monkey is like, and what a pig is like, and they can all get into that. And that's a pretty good way to get into commedia too.
And it's also setting it up that nobody can fail.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've seen her do that with adults. We got a job through the fair to do a commedia at really, really rich wedding or a rich party in Tahoe. And we did the commedia. We did our regular commedia, which they really enjoyed. But then we pulled people up on the stage, and we had them do those things. Marilyn would pull them up on the stage, and you're going to play this part or play this part. Here's a mask. Think of him as a chicken running around with his head cut off. Think of him as a wolf. They loved it. And there again, nobody was telling him you weren't doing wolf right. It puts the play in player,
Another thing that has been brought out in previous interviews, actors who have been trained to work with the mask versus actors who have not been trained to have a mask.
Yeah.
How has wearing a mask influenced your acting?
Well, it really takes you out of your face. It takes you into your body. You can't just look quizzical because nobody can see your forehead. Be taken aback by actually moving back. You have to actually use your whole body to act. You have to express emotion. You have to do all sorts of things without using your face. So it's tough. especially for those people like you mentioned at UCLA, where it's all internal. It also frees you up too, because it takes it out of you. It's not you anymore. It's this character. Yeah. And that you learn that commedia. You learn that you're not just your face, your whole body, which was tough for me to learn because I have a pretty expressive face and I always like to connect on that level, but it was fun. It was fun to do these other characters that weren't me.
How long were you Lord Mayor?
I was only Lord Mayor for 1 year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Oh, well, might have been 2. No, I think it was only 1. It was not a fun job, frankly. Wearing 40 pounds of green velvet when it's 90 degrees out is not fun. And it was a very busy time because I had my own 3 shows a day on the stage. Plus, I had to do the noon show and the Queen show and wander around in the crowd. We did with pipe outer court too, where we would pull somebody in. We'd have formed a little court in the street, and the mayor would pass judgment on somebody, a mountebank or a Puritan. I think I punished Jim Letchworth a couple of times as a Puritan. That was a full day. And then you added the 3 shows. And I don't remember if Scott Beach came back after that, but I don't remember who was Lord Mayor after that.
When you were kind enough to say yes to agree to this interview, was there a story or person you want to mention that we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, we touched briefly on Patrick Porter. I don't know if you ever knew him.
No, I didn't.
He was one of those early fair people, and he was really instrumental in getting me involved in the acting at the fair. Like I said before, I was just a hawker. I think we mentioned everybody else.
Do you remember a specific lesson that he gave you that has resonated till today?
Just try it. And also, he was very good. He was a good writer. And some of his stuff was a bit esoteric, that not everybody would get it. And that was okay. You can write jokes that some people get and some people don't. And when the people do get it, they'll really, well, like he had a play called the Florentine Paradox, which was about 2 dottores. It was very funny. And
what were they discussing, or what was the point of contention?
Well, I think they were both after the same Isabella, but the fact that it was called a paradox, that little in-joke, about the word and the 2 doctors. He was instrumental in getting me to know a lot of people. Who else did I remember? Oh, Dennis Day. I remember him. He was quite good. He was one of the fair originals. He was also a Musketeer. He died recently. He did a wonderful act at the Dickens Fair called Nobody Loves a Fairy When She's 40. And it was so funny, and it was so self-depreciating that it brought the house down every time. Oh, and Patty Farber, another. She led the belly dancers, and she also made clothing, but she led the belly dancers too, and she was wonderful. Well, first I thought, why do they have belly dancers in England? And that's when I sort of realized, oh yeah, well, this is because it's a traveling show. These are all, and then we are too. The most amazing thing, though, is Patty would always organize night shows. We would do night shows on the Monterey or Dairy Creek, depending on where you were. And we would put together these elaborate shows that were not Renaissance, by the way. They were like, I remember we did one that was like a gangster 30s thing. And Marilyn played Legs Diamond, and we sang Andrew's Sister songs. And the crowd was all the exhausted fair people, the exhausted vendors, everybody who's staying the night, everybody had a night pass. That's really when it was, you suddenly realize, this is my village, these are my people. She always organized them. And the belly dancers would do, because most of them were dancers, would do kick lines and all sorts of interesting stuff.
For me, it was David Springhorn.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was wonderful. I had a mug of his that I broke a few weeks ago. I was so mad. Funny thing about David Springhorn is sort of, he and I were not friends particularly, but everybody I knew was a friend of his, and everybody he knew was a friend of mine. So it was very strange, I would always, I mean, I knew he was, and I always knew about him. And
What I got from David was always be aware of where the audience is and play to them. So if you're doing a improv on the street, don't clump in a circle and just talk across the circle.
yeah,
Everyone turn around and make an interesting tableau.
that was a big problem that I found kind of annoying when I became Lord Mayor, is when I was with the court. A lot of them would do that. They would just sort of, we're going to talk to each other quietly. Yeah. And people can watch us do that. So at least they need to hear. If you're going to do that, you need to be talking about the Earl of What's It loud enough for them to hear. He was really good at that. It's funny, there's a pirate on the, you go to the Pirates of the Caribbean much?
Yeah. The ride at Disney? Sure.
The one who's got one foot in the boat and he's carrying a bunch of hats. Marilyn and I both thought he looked like David Springhorn. So every time we were at Disneyland together, we'd be like, look, and that was a lot of times, by the way. Look, there's David Springhorn. Check him out next time you're there. One thing that I think was kind of interesting is me and two other friends, Anna Rayner and Leo Brody, put together a medicine show. I found this in an old little recipe for a patent medicine that was supposed to cure all ills. It was called Arum Portabile, and it contained mostly alcohol and salt, but also 1 ounce of pure gold. We printed it up using like a Gothic script, and we put it on the paper that looks like parchment. And we had 2 on a sheet and cut it in half, and scrolled it up and tied a little ribbon around it and put it in, got about a bunch of them in the basket. And we did this whole long show about how we discovered this. It was funny, it's something you could do back then. The show was virulently anti-Catholic, and Catholics thought it was hilarious. But you're not supposed to pass the hat on stages. You weren't allowed to, because you were being paid more than the other actors. So I talked to Phyllis and I said, well, look, we're selling something and we're going to sell it for 10 pence. And nobody's obviously going to want it. So we're going to get to barter in period amounts. Instead of saying a beer is 300 pence, we could say, this is 10 pence. Would you pay 2 pence? Would you pay 1 pence? So she thought that was funny. So she said, okay, fine. What happened was, soon as people found out there was something they could buy at the fair for a dime, they didn't care what it was. They wanted wine. So we ended up having to go back every week to get another printing and sit there rolling these things. And I think we probably made a slight profit on it, but I have one around here somewhere in a scrapbook. But that was decades ago. I can't remember when.
For some reason, this probably says something more about me. I didn't feel comfortable passing the hat because they'd already paid to get in. And the whole idea was we were there just to provide the fun of entertainment, not to pass the hat. Now, I know a lot of people relied on passing the hat, but I always had a day job kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I didn't like, except that one time when we were playing characters who were out to fleece them and out to separate them from their money, then it made sense, but that's why I didn't want to say, this is only 100 pence. I want to say this.
Right. Everybody can afford a penny kind of thing, or everybody can afford a dime.
I thought maybe little kids could come up, and they did. And that was kind of fun, little kids.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, you're not going to enjoy this. I mean, it was pretty. It kind of looked like old timey writing. And that was my, I did a couple of other medicine shows, but usually it was commedia. Thieves Theater was just something completely off the wall. We did Robin Hood and the Key of Chastity. I played Guinevere. We did Robin Hood and the Holy Toe. It was about relics, where we're trying to steal the toe of Saint somebody. I remember we had one of my favorite jokes in the play was we had the skeleton, the sacred bones of Saint Peter. And the guy said, is it the entire skeleton? He said, it's 2 entire skeletons. One was grown up and one was a little boy. Those Steve Theater shows, people would come back over and over and over to where they kind of knew the lines. That was like feeling like a star. We had followers, we had groupies, we had people who wanted to see our show again and again and again. And that's true when I realized that, the audience is not there to judge you. The audience is there to help you. They're there to have fun. I mean, I don't know, some people that means you don't have to work very hard. To me, it meant, a much greater responsibility to give them the enjoyment they have, what they want.
I really liked seeing especially when you're on the street, a patron just getting a look of joy and fun as you come up and do your silly little spiel, and that they start playing along with you. And to me, those were sort of why I did it, more than say the show that got a standing ovation, or it was just that one-on-one, Gaji Gooden, would you like to buy the new world? We'll name it after you. What's your name? Bill. We'll call it Bill Land, and you just build on it like that. I kind of like to think that Bill sort of remembered that interaction more than almost anything else.
Yeah, I remember in the Dickens show I did with Patrick Porter, we tried to do period, so it was racist, in a funny way. We would talk about there's an old line, black men start at Calais, that everybody is inferior to the English. Of course, the England flooded China with opium to get all their gold back and silver back. So we had a line there about the drugged and mindless Chinese. We had pulled somebody out of the audience for it who was Asian. We did that line, and he just cracked up. Decades later, that guy worked at Kaiser, and he came up to me and said, "I was the drugged and mindless Chinese guy back in the Dickens Fair." That, well, he still remembers that from 20 years ago. That was great. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie State and Maine. It's a pretty good movie, but it's about a movie company that comes to this little town to make a movie and completely wreck the town. And one of the main characters has a romance with a woman who's actually, she's the librarian. And she was putting on a production of Shakespeare with all the local people. And all these local people were learning these words and learning to speak iambic pentameter. And the movie sort of made the point that, yeah, Hollywood's great, and it's wonderful to see the best actors in the world on stage or on film. But really, the community theater was more important to the culture, because it's regular people interacting with art, regular people learning something, not just being entertained, but being pulled into it. And the fair, I think, did that. And I agree with that. It's the actors you see live. It's the actors you see in your community theater or even Ashland Shakespeare. It shows that they'll have a strong memory of this. I remember I used to do these big group vacations. So we all put our money together and rented a villa in Tuscany for 2 weeks. And one of the days there was going to be midsummer. So I said, we're going to do a stage reading of Midsummer Night's Dream. And I cast it all weird. Marilyn was one of the Marilyn at the time was about 40, maybe something, was one of the young ingenues. And I mean, most people were, so half of them were actors, half of them weren't. But we all did that. And the one thing I insisted was that we not film it. One person who was, I wish I hadn't been there, said, "Oh, I'm going to film the whole thing on my iPad." And I said, no. She did anyway, but I said, don't ever show it to me. Don't ever show it to anyone, because you watch it and you become a critic. It probably wasn't the best production of Midsummer Night's Dream ever done, but it was so much fun. And it's such an indelible point in our life that we all remember it. We all remember it as brilliant. And so to that extent, it was. Oh, and that's the same thing with the fair. People remember that thing when they bought Bill Land for a dime. People remember that stuff. And that's regular people engaging actively with art, not just watching it. Phyllis called it living history, but it's really more like living art.
Now that we've talked for, say, an hour and 20 minutes, is there another story or conclusion you'd like to leave us with?
I think I probably said it all. The only thing I can think of is that I hope I've already made the point of how important the fair was to me and how its importance increases as I age. I realize what a wonderful, wonderful time it was. I mean, at the time, sometimes I thought, oh, I'm doing this for $100 a day and people are getting thousands of dollars a day for acting, but I mean, all that money's gone anyway. That's pretty much it. That kind of interactive art is really important to our culture. I'd really be ashamed to lose it. And I feel like we are. People don't even watch their kids' school pageants anymore. They record their school pageants so they can watch it later, which means they're missing the real event. And the fair was the real event.
And who helped you create that? Once again, atmosphere at fair?
Phyllis and Patrick Porter and Marilyn and Jim Letchworth and all the Once and Favor Play people and all the Thieves Theater people and everybody, the vendors, everybody who worked together to make it a reality. It was a shire, it was a whole town, and we made it a whole town. And I was proud to have been a citizen of that town. Thank you.
That's my September 2023 interview with James Bohlin. If you'd like me to forward a question or comment to Jim, feel free to email me at djng@earthlink.net. Questions or comments on the podcast itself can also be directed to me at djng@earthlink.net. If you or somebody you know of would like to be a guest of Fair Folk at Work, please email me at djng@earthlink.net. But that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.